Hisu was infuriated with his stepbrother, as the elder scolded him yet again. This was because the latter failed to grasp an important rule. The wealthy man did not consult Jokun, but instead took independent action. He now intended to educate his younger sibling thoroughly. 11 years ago, everything was quite different. At that time, a personal driver arrived at the office of a major company's president, who courteously bowed to the man. Yun was recognized as a genius by many, since his pharmaceutical company was a global leader. Even serving as his driver seemed like an honor. Xiao maintained a positive outlook while working with the man. He promised Yun to bring him home safely, as he was eager to see his son as soon as possible. Everyone admired the man's car, but in reality, even such a great individual had his unique troubles. Approaching the mansion, the man anticipated meeting his son. Upon entering the building, he smiled and called out for Hisu. However, the heir did not rush out to greet the company president. Instead, he hid behind one of the maids. Nevertheless, Yun eventually picked up his son. He inquired about how his day went. Yet the boy did not respond, as if hesitant to speak with his parent. Therefore, the man decided not to press his son for even a few sentences and let him go. Instead, he instructed the maid to prepare a bath, wishing to relax after a strenuous workday. At this time, the driver was supposed to watch over Hisu. The rich man's heir immediately became bold and unruly, realizing that his father was not around. The company director had only one son, but also had several daughters from a mother whom he had divorced, after which he started a relationship with another woman, who was likely an actress and bore him a son. This son now openly mocked the person, who was supposed to look after him in the absence of his father and the maid. Observing how others were afraid to argue with him, the protagonist became even more brazen, taunting them mercilessly. Hisu knew well that his parent would not become angry, regardless of what happened. Therefore, he continued to be stubborn, rude, and even aggressive. Simple children's games sometimes harmed those around him. He particularly despised those who tried to teach him anything. Thus, the female teacher assigned to him suffered most from the antics of the wealthy heir. The maid regretted that another household employee had to endure such treatment, but she could do nothing about the rich heir's disposition. It was unclear why the beloved son of a major company's owner behaved so terribly that almost no one could tame his temperament. Except for one person living in the mansion, Jo-chan was an excellent student at school, which is why he was brought into the company. It turned out he was also an orphan, but apparently, he was not upset by this fact. Therefore, he seemed excessively kind and proper. Now, when everyone thought that the major company owner's heir would need to hire another teacher, Jo-chan intervened and declared that there was no need. None of those present could understand how the woman was supposed to cope with such a terrible student who would not listen to her. In any case, Yun had previously informed that he could no longer bring educators for his son, as he had already changed many. Therefore, Jokun confidently entered the protagonist's room, appearing stern and unemotional. At first, the screams of the disobedient rich son were heard in the room. He obviously treated his stepbrother as he did the others. However, over time, everything quieted down, and silence ensued, causing the household servants to worry even more, as no one could believe that the rich son had come to his senses. Afterwards, the elder stepped into the corridor and informed the teacher of his pupil's promise to learn the necessary information by the next lesson. Moreover, he even thanked the woman for her work before going to attend to his own affairs. Everyone was surprised that the boy had so quickly dealt with Hisu's unbearable temperament, although this was not the first time such a thing had happened. No one could understand how the stepbrother influenced the rich son, but they were sure that even though they were not relatives, they got along quite well. Jo-chan did not reveal his secrets of upbringing, always pretending that he used no special methods for the younger one. One day, the family gathered at the dining table, with even the maid present, sharing a meal with the mansion's owner. Suddenly, the man recalled the excellent result his foster son had achieved on one of the recent academic tests. Of course, it wouldn't significantly impact future grades or exams, but any commendable result deserves acknowledgement. However, Yun made it clear that he expected much more from the boy he was raising, nothing less than first place in school. Naturally, the owner of the large company did not openly devalue the orphan's efforts, instead pretending to offer support through his comments. Moreover, Jo-chan assured his foster parent of his determination to achieve far better results than he currently held. The driver, also present at the table, remembered that the boy was not only good at studying, but also excelled in sports and other activities. From just one look at this individual, one could deduce that he was genuinely noble and diligent in all his endeavors. Furthermore, Jokun also proved to be exceptionally talented in business, enabling him to assist Yun during crucial meetings. The man always proudly introduced his foster child to acquaintances, clearly proud of his unique talents. Additionally, in doing so, the president of the large company also cast himself in the best light as a caring foster father. At the same time, the young man observed the habits of business people and easily understood their true motives. Moreover, this insight helped Jokshan to identify anyone's vulnerabilities, which was quite useful in conducting business. Thus, even before finishing school, the boy could facilitate numerous advantageous deals. To those around him, he was simply a good, inquisitive foster son of an important figure, unaware that all these pleasantries were part of a plan. Even the household staff thought Joshan was perfect, but the stepbrother immediately disliked him, especially when he attempted to tame the protagonist's temper by taking him to a special punishment room where they remained alone. No one knew what occurred there. Onlookers could only observe how the disruptive heir's screams eventually subsided over time. One day, the driver decided to inquire about what was happening in the secluded room, concerned that physical punishment might be involved. However, in reality, nothing harmful occurred there. The boy himself assured that he was merely helping Hisu with his needs. No one knew the origin of the name punishment room. The servants simply noticed that every time the wealthy heir behaved terribly, the elder would take him to that place. There, he disciplined his brother to prevent him from troubling others with his dreadful demeanor, which always had the desired effect. Once, during a gathering at the table, Hisu secretly placed a whoopee cushion under the driver's seat, and when the joke succeeded, he laughed uproariously. He openly mocked the man, pretending that the unpleasant noise was made by him, leaving the household worker powerless to respond. Suddenly, Jokin approached the main character from behind, placed his hand on the younger's shoulder, and advised him to observe the rules of decorum. This greatly alarmed the wealthy heir, who clearly did not expect his prank to be noticed by his stepbrother. The other guests froze, silently watching the scene, puzzled by the strange behavior of the mansion owner's son. After the object that caused the uncomfortable situation was removed, the boy softened and, with a smile, invited his brother to commence the meal. However, this only seemed to infuriate him further. He pushed Jokan away and appeared to simply try to escape from the dining room. In reality, before leaving, he pelted his stepbrother with exploding balloons as revenge for spoiling his joke. Everyone was shocked by how brazenly Hisu acted towards the only person capable of disciplining him. The driver was concerned for the victim, but he was obviously all right, albeit visibly furious because of the prank. Therefore, the boy planned to take the younger to the discipline room, despite all the desperate protests of the protagonist. Often, after some time in the mysterious room, the usually brash and bold Hisu became unusually calm. No matter how much they tried to question him about what happened, no answers were forthcoming. When the main character leaves to reflect on the events, Jokin remains calm, though he looks at his stepbrother quite oddly. At the same time, he also gave vague comments about his interactions with the younger, answering questions ambiguously. This created a sense that the room had become a special place just for the two of them, inaccessible to anyone else. It seemed like a forbidden zone, hidden from the rest of the world, but it likely suited both of them. After the incident, Jo-chan, while taking a bath, examined his legs, which bore marks from the protagonist's prank. He resolved that he would be more cautious in assessing situations in the future to prevent any recurrence. Suddenly, the boy remembered his real parents, whom he considered truly good people, unlike others. He had thought this back when his family was still together, and it seemed that everyone was happy because of it. One day drastically altered Jo-chan's life, as the people closest to him decided to end their lives, leaving only a suicide note. Since then, he had been unable to forgive them and began to despise them for their actions. Once, during a routine tea time, Yun decided to inquire about his son's education from his teacher. Of course, he knew that Hisu had a rather difficult temperament, but he hoped that the woman had managed to impart some basic knowledge to him. The teacher tried not to upset the man and also praised Jokan, who had been a great help during the teaching. Suddenly, the heir of the large company entered the room, and all present tried to appear kind towards him. The father of the brothers was very pleased that they got along so well with each other and hoped that the boys would continue to support one another. The main character looked at Joshan but hesitated to say anything, even failing initially to respond to a direct question about his feelings towards him. The servants hoped that the two were truly friendly and therefore anticipated a benevolent response. However, the younger disappointed everyone by openly declaring his hatred for the boy, clearly the one who irritated Hisu the most. Moreover, the young heir did not hesitate to call Jokan a monster, which did not hurt him but made him ponder the attitudes of those around him. Many had spoken to the boy about the oddities of his character, especially concerning his former beloved. Yun merely laughed at this, since it is common for many girls to begin despising their partners after a breakup. For the foster father, the boy's education was of utmost importance. If the situation did not interfere with that, then it was not worthy of special attention. The man returned to discussing other topics, not even noticing how much he had hurt Joshan with his reaction. The boy stepped outside and tried to calm himself. He did not want to show weakness to others, so he made sure no one was nearby. He then sat down on the floor and finally relaxed, trying to convince himself that nothing terrible had happened. He firmly decided that next time he would be more cautious and strive to perform far better than he currently was. Upon entering his room, the boy intended to return to his studies, but suddenly discovered a bloodstain on his notebook that obscured some of the entries inside. That morning, the driver brought Jokon food since he had been unable to dine with everyone else earlier. The man knocked on the door but received no response, leading him to assume that the room's occupant was still asleep after a taxing day. Nevertheless, he decided to enter to place the tray by the door when he noticed papers scattered around the room. The boy himself was sound asleep amid his own mathematical calculations, which seemed quite peculiar. All the problems had been solved perfectly, and the man was very surprised to see this, but he could not wake Jokon. Unexpectedly, he awoke at the most inopportune moment and startled the uninvited guest in his room. The visitor immediately apologized for such a sudden intrusion, and after ensuring it was not a problem, took the opportunity to praise the calculations he had observed. It was unclear why the notebooks were torn. Perhaps it was due to excessive strain during his school studies. The driver recalled how, while preparing for college, he could not grasp some aspects of mathematical problems and despised the subject. In contrast, the boy had a profound affection for the exact sciences, even considering them the best thing in the world. This greatly astonished the man, but he would long remember this period of living with Yun's foster son in the house. That evening, they spent some time discussing problems, particularly those that could be solved in various ways. Later, even during meals, Jokon paid no attention to his family, completely absorbed in thoughts about his studies. This was because, during his mathematics sessions, the boy felt a sense of freedom he did not experience at any other time. He spent a great deal of time at the table, engaged in various calculations, finding the formulas simple and intriguing. In this endeavor, Joshin reached perfection, as none of his peers could do better. The driver praised the foster son of the company owner, inquired about his dreams, and did everything possible to support his passions. One day, Yun asked the boy about his future goals, as it was time to prepare for university admission. Reflecting on his conversation with the man who worked for the family, Jokon decided to candidly admit his desire to study mathematics. He hoped that such a response would be appropriate since, like in his favorite subject, the process of achieving results was crucial in life. However, he was mistaken in this assumption, as he did not realize that he could not fully choose his own future. The foster father approached his son and attempted to convey a simple truth that he had previously thought the boy could understand on his own. It was necessary to understand his status in order to comprehend the limits of his choices. On the day of his school graduation, the mansion's servants organized a small celebration for the boy, as he had already been admitted to the economics department. He himself was clearly not pleased with the proceedings, as he did not consider the event worthy of celebration. However, everyone was delighted that such a bright young man had not only aced his exams, but also secured a place at one of the best educational institutions. Yet, he himself looked very sad, clearly unenthused by the prospect of studying at such a place. Suddenly, the nanny of his younger brother entered the room, bringing Hisu, although no one had expected to see him there. The main character was embarrassed and unable to explain what was happening, so the woman assisted him by mentioning the gift he had brought for Jochin. She also tried to support the protagonist as he approached the elder to hand over the box. Unexpectedly, the boy was pleased by the attention from his brother, who had previously seemed to simply despise him. With a remarkably gentle smile, the son of the company owner congratulated Jokun on his university admission. Everyone around considered such an act quite endearing, not suspecting that it might have an ulterior motive. The servants hoped that the person who had previously caused only problems had finally matured and would now behave more prudently. The boy politely thanked Hisu, who immediately asked him to open the gift, which seemed rather suspicious. Initially, Jo-chan was reluctant to do so, but the onlookers also wanted to know what was in the box, so they encouraged him to open it. It turned out to be another prank, as after opening the box, a bag inside it burst forth with a shower of glitter. The glitter stuck to not only the boy's clothes and face, but also those of everyone nearby, thus spoiling their celebration. The protagonist prudently shielded himself with a small umbrella to remain clean and laughed as he observed the unfolding scene. Such gifts were considered a mockery, and despite Jokun's long stay in the house, his stepbrother had still not accepted him and continued to mock him. The wealthy son's nanny sighed, realizing that each year his character only worsened. Even towards those who could handle his antics, he dared to act with utter disdain. The prospective student simply walked away without saying a word, not even bothering to get angry or try to punish the insolent heir. This only amused Hisu more. He even took photos, finding his stepbrother comical in such a state. It turned out that the president's heir had chosen this particular day for his antics because with the boy in a good mood, there was a chance to avoid punishment. The driver tried to talk to his boss's son, who would soon have to attend school with peers, a significant change from homeschooling. Such brazen pranks would not be tolerated there, so they could no longer continue. However, the boy saw no point in changing his behavior, convinced that regardless of his actions, everyone would hate him anyway. All due to his dubious origins and unknown mother, he might not be a bad boy, just one who tormented those around him. Looking at the driver who tried to appear kind, the protagonist openly stated that he knew of his hatred. The man himself harbored no negative feelings towards his boss's son, though he was sometimes displeased with his actions. It was remarkable how the young heir could not believe that he was not indifferent to someone. Despite the man's words, he knew that sooner or later, the feeling of antipathy would reach him too. Unexpectedly, Jokan appeared behind him, having overheard the entire conversation, yet still seemed intimidating. The boy also could not understand why his stepbrother had such a terrible opinion of others. Some time later, Hisu screamed and called for help as he was dragged to the now familiar punishment room. The driver attempted to stop it, but Jokan brusquely made it clear that the servants should not interfere in conflicts between brothers. The man was about to object, but suddenly saw the younger brother inadvertently pull off the boy's clothing while trying to grasp it. As the boy's trousers fell, everyone froze in horror, no longer daring to argue with him or shout. This was because bruises, clearly left by forceful blows, were visible on Jochan's legs. Hisu even apologized, although such behavior was uncharacteristic of him, but now none of that seemed to matter. The future student tried to remain impassive, quietly adjusting his clothes so as not to embarrass anyone. 2 months ago, sounds of beating emanated from the president's office of the large company. No one dared to enter. The mansion owner was brutally beating a person who refused to submit to his will, oblivious to the wrongdoing. It turned out that Jokan was being punished for a reason. He had tried to enroll in his desired program despite the prohibition. Meanwhile, teachers covered up the graduate's lie, which was quite unusual and should have been reported immediately. Now, the wealthy man tried to explain to his foster son that his only options were to enroll in either economics or management. This was because he needed to be useful to the business of the man who had rescued him from the orphanage. Since that strange incident, Jokan decided that no one else would interfere with the younger brother's upbringing. While the boy tried to discuss Hisu's behavior, the wealthy heir was more concerned about the condition of his stepbrother. He suspected that their father was to blame, but could not get a direct answer. The boy simply called his brother over, despite being visibly displeased with the peculiar dialogue. Much time had passed since then, and now Hisu had matured and was heading to school more calmly. He was thinking about his father, but the opening of the car door distracted him from these thoughts, and his personal driver stepped inside. Surprisingly, Jochan now held this position, although he was supposed to be attending university. Nevertheless, the younger brother seemed embarrassed, looking at his stepbrother, perhaps deeming him worthy of more than just this role. The director of the large company often spoke to his biological son about his duty to grow into a worthy heir. Although the man truly loved him, he was simply trying to provide everything he himself had never received. Early that morning, his stepbrother, who now referred to the owner's son as Sir, came to see the protagonist. Despite the late hour and much to be done before school, the younger brother was reluctant to wake up. The room felt chilly, and Jokan adjusted the temperature using a heater, also helping the protagonist dress independently. Additionally, the driver decided to review Hisu's test results, though the latter was not inclined to discuss his education. Even on the way to school, the boy tried to impress upon the wealthy son all that he needed to learn from analyzing mathematical problems. Hisu made every effort to change the subject, as he disliked the topic of exact sciences, but unfortunately, the exams were too imminent to ignore. The protagonist understood this and remembered how, over the past decade, his stepbrother had served as his personal driver following the disappearance of the previous one. He always remained polite, although he persistently tried to impart new knowledge to the younger one. That day, as he dropped him off at school, the worker wished Hisu a good academic day, but of course received no response. It was comforting that the protagonist no longer had to go to school alone. There was always company. Meanwhile, at the main office of Yun's company, a new secretary started, who was obviously unaccustomed to such a position. Jochan also held this role. Initially, he tried to inquire about his father's employees, But when the latter became irritated, he effortlessly recalled all the names himself. Clearly, the boy performed quite well, scheduling meetings appropriately, even though he himself was occasionally late to work. Nevertheless, the man did not regret his decision to entrust the upbringing of his own son to this individual. Now, the head of the corporation could easily keep track of the heir's academic performance without being too distracted from the work process. Everyone knew that Joshin not only became the business assistant to his foster father, but also cared for his younger brother, which became a source of ridicule. At 18, Hisu was well aware of his influence, as everyone had treated him with respect since childhood. At school, he thought about his driver, who had long become one of the most authoritative figures in the household. On the protagonist's birthday, his coming of age, many well-known societal figures gathered. Although everyone tried to appear polite, it was clear that no one took the wealthy heir seriously. Nevertheless, only the most favorable rumors circulated about the young man, who, in addition to his handsome appearance likely inherited from his actress mother, also excelled academically. Yet, the guests were convinced that the president of the large company was using his son as a means to boast to others. The secretary also received considerable attention, with discussions about his close relationship with Hisu, indicating they had long been very close. Meanwhile, the protagonist was preparing to greet the arriving guests, pensively donning his suit. It seemed that the birthday celebration did not bring him much joy. He was reluctant to be the center of attention. The young man was acutely aware that he had become a testament to how Jochan had successfully transformed a troublesome child into an admirable adult. It wasn't terribly important what people thought, yet they had a penchant for assigning hurtful nicknames too freely. Even fully prepared, he lingered in his room, continually reminiscing about the past. Suddenly, Jochan approached him from behind. He had tried to knock politely on the door, but apparently had not been heard. On this significant day, the young man was to present himself before the influential figures of the financial world. They had all gathered on this important date to offer their congratulations, marking his first official foray into society. Hisu disliked all this. He longed for a simple celebration like those of his past, but unfortunately, that was no longer possible. Everyone needed to see how the president's heir had matured into a worthy individual to pave the way for future essential connections. Jochan reassured his stepbrother that the proceedings were not detrimental, but rather beneficial, as their father could take pride in them. However, this also meant that he needed to look his best on this day, despite his desire for tranquility. The man helped the young man straighten his back, enabling him to approach the guests with confidence and assert his presence. Beyond posture, the protagonist's facial expressions played a huge role in making a first impression. It was crucial to maintain a composed demeanor and keep the upper jaw tense. Hisu maintained this posture only as long as his father's secretary supported him in doing so. As soon as the control was relaxed, the guest of honor hastened to ease his stance for his own comfort in the situation. Psychologically, it is best to take full control of each of your emotions, a point also emphasized by the secretary. He did everything in such a way that it would benefit his boss's heir, but unfortunately, the latter failed to appreciate it. As a result, the young man saw the elder as a puppeteer, controlling him like a marionette, clearly feeling that his opinions were disregarded. Now he was ready to present himself to everyone who would be judging his appearance and upbringing today. As soon as Hisu entered the main hall, he immediately wanted to leave, overwhelmed by the excessive noise and the lackluster festivities. Everyone congratulated him, feigning genuine pleasure at seeing him, attending his celebration, and forging social connections. Yun openly boasted about his heir to everyone, as if he had never previously showcased him without significant reason. Younger guests tried to come up with more interesting congratulations for the guest of honor, while also complimenting his appearance. His father noticed that Hisu was almost reluctant to talk to anyone, thus considering his son to be quite a bore, though he had not been so in his childhood. Jochan briefly informed the protagonist about each guest he was about to greet, noting that some preferences should be considered when interacting. Thus, the young man realized that he was surrounded not only by the wealthy, but also by exceedingly greedy individuals, many of whom tried to evade paying taxes. Therefore, Hisu quickly grew bored in such company, longing for a moment alone, but he was not allowed to do so. Knowing the traits of all these hypocritical personalities, it was difficult to take their praise at face value. When a man approached him, he boldly started a conversation, trying to finally engage with the heir of the large company. The guest behaved somewhat improperly, making odd compliments to the young man and suddenly squeezing his hand too tightly. Jochan then intervened, defending his stepbrother with noticeable aggression, which even unsettled the guest. The guest immediately showed by his demeanor that he had not intended any harm, clearly intimidated by the secretary. Somewhat childishly, the protagonist complained about the odd character of the person he was forced to interact with. Realizing that nothing good would come from further conversation, Jochen suggested that the guest of honor take a break. For this, it was best to step outside for a brief moment of fresh air. So he led the protagonist away from the strange individual. Jochen looked angrier than ever before, which clearly indicated his deep concern for his charge. Together, they stepped out onto the veranda, where it was at least empty and quiet, although the heat somewhat marred the atmosphere. The young man was even disgruntled that his birthday occurred in summer, when it was too hot even to stay outdoors. Suddenly, he noticed that his stepbrother had returned to the guests, but still stood close to the balcony exit, as if deliberately. Evidently, the secretary was trying to monitor his boss's son, and while this seemed normal to everyone else, it infuriated the young man. This irritated the now adult heir, who was perfectly capable of managing his own life, even regarding the smallest details. Suddenly, the young man heard something fall nearby, apparently from the floor above where there was no celebration. Afterward, the person who had fallen into the bushes made no sound, causing the protagonist to worry. This was because the fall was from a considerable height, and the stranger could have sustained serious injuries that might require help. Just as Hisu was about to run back inside to ask an adult to check the situation, a hand of the injured person appeared on the balcony. The protagonist was greatly startled and even stepped back, not expecting someone to rise so easily after falling from such a great height. It turned out to be a girl who immediately asked the heir to keep quiet and not reveal that she had been there, after which she simply ran away, leaving the guest of honor in complete bewilderment and even embarrassment. Returning to the hall with the others, Hisu pondered the mysterious stranger he had encountered and hoped she would not discover his identity. Moreover, the girl had clearly piqued the protagonist's interest, and he wished to see her again, though he was unsure if the opportunity would arise. Suddenly, 2 guards brought her into the hall. Clearly, the strange lady was quite unhappy about being caught. The guest of honor was shocked, as he had not expected the chance to meet the girl to come so soon. A relative of the young troublemaker was very angry at her for such antics, and did not hesitate to start an argument in front of everyone. The younger girl continued to deny any wrongdoing, pretending not to hear the scolding, clearly indifferent to the rules of decorum. Suddenly, the girl turned to the protagonist, and as soon as she saw him, she claimed that he was partly to blame for what had happened. She was convinced that the young man had called the guards and told everyone he had seen her on the balcony, although in reality, this was not the case. Suddenly, the same lady appeared nearby in different attire, trying to understand what had really happened. She suspected that Hisu had indeed exposed the young troublemaker, but as soon as he tried to assure her otherwise, the girl believed him. In fact, the girl already knew that a waiter who had noticed her was to blame, so she harbored no resentment towards the heir of the large company. Now that she knew exactly who she was dealing with, and upon learning that it was his celebration, she decided to sincerely congratulate him. She even presented him with a beautiful flower, mysteriously acquired in such a short time, which greatly surprised him. Being of the same age, conversation came naturally to both of them, and the girl proved to be friendly, unlike the adults who had come solely for personal gain. Eventually, they agreed to become friends, both genuinely delighted by this development. Jo-chan also noted that his charge had made a new friend, and pretended to be pleased by this fact. The girl was slightly frightened and quietly asked who this adult was, referring to him in a somewhat childlike manner. This amused the young man, as no one had ever referred to his stepbrother in such a way before, which he found quite amusing. The next day on the way to school, Jo-chan began to tell the protagonist about the family of his new friend and the potential benefits of their acquaintance. Not wanting to hear this, the young man immediately made it clear that he disliked conversing with the girl and did not plan to continue seeing her. Yet he could not stop recalling the face of someone who had been sincere with him for the first time, rather than attempting to flatter him.